Jack Riley stood alone in the ruins of Settlement 7, his heavy boots crushing broken concrete and twisted metal beneath his feet. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across what used to be a thriving human colony. Now it was just wreckage, buildings torn apart, vehicles stripped and abandoned, and an eerie silence that made the air feel thick and wrong. 20 years. That's how long Jack had served in the military before he decided to leave it all behind and settle on this distant planet. He'd spent those 2 decades learning things that most people never wanted to know. He'd learned how to recognize fear in another being's eyes. He'd learned how to spot pain hidden beneath anger and aggression. He'd learned that suffering always finds a way to show itself, no matter what shape it takes. Even when it came wrapped in scales and teeth. The sound came first, a hiss so sharp and sudden that Jack's hand instinctively moved to his side, even though he didn't carry weapons anymore. From beneath a massive concrete wall, something moved. A creature no bigger than a large dog, maybe 6 feet long from nose to tail. Was a dragon. A young one. Its left wing hung at a broken angle, and its entire body trembled with a mixture of pain and pure animal rage. The thing stared at Jack with eyes that burned like molten gold. Those eyes said one thing clearly: "Hurt me and I'll kill you." Jack slowly raised his hands and took a single step backward. "Easy, kid," he said softly, keeping his voice low and steady. "I'm not going to hurt you." His radio crackled to life immediately. It was Dr. Patricia Webb from the colony administration, the one person who actually had authority around here. "Riley, step away from that thing. Get out of there now." More voices joined hers. Scientists, administrators, security personnel, all screaming the same message. Dragons weren't like other animals. They couldn't be trained. They couldn't be reasoned with. They were pure killers, born and bred for violence. Everyone knew this. Everyone accepted it as simple fact. Jack ignored them and turned down the volume on his radio. He'd spent 20 years watching authority figures tell him what was possible and what wasn't. He'd seen them give up on soldiers who could still be saved. He'd watched them abandon people who just needed the right kind of help from the right kind of person. He understood that sometimes the official wisdom was just wrong. Sometimes what looked like a monster was actually just a frightened, hurt creature that had never learned anything else. The dragon hissed again, but it didn't attack. It was waiting. Watching. Judging whether Jack was a threat. "I know what they're all saying," Jack continued in that same calm voice. He slowly moved toward his vehicle, keeping his eyes on the creature the entire time. "They're saying you're too wild. Too dangerous. Not worth saving. I've heard that speech before. Heard it plenty of times. But here's what I know. Every killer I ever met was taught to kill. Nothing's born that way. You're just scared and hurt." He reached into the storage compartment of his truck and pulled out a medical kit. Inside was a veterinary sedative that he'd used before on injured wildlife. Jack had never planned on using it today, but he'd learned a long time ago to trust his instincts. The dragon watched every movement. Jack drew the liquid into a hypodermic needle, careful, steady movements with nothing rushed or threatening about them. "This is going to help with the pain," he said, approaching the injured creature. "Just let it happen, kid." The dragon could have killed him in that moment. Could have torn him apart in seconds. Instead, something in those intelligent golden eyes shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was understanding that this human wasn't acting like a hunter. Maybe the pain was just too much to carry alone anymore. The needle went in smoothly. Within minutes, the dragon's eyes began to close. His breathing slowed. The trembling stopped. Jack wrapped the now sedated creature in a thermal blanket and carefully loaded it into the back of his truck. The radio came back to life. More demands, more warnings, more angry voices telling him he was making a catastrophic mistake. Jack ignored all of it, climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. By the time he reached his homestead 2 hours away, the sun was setting. The sky turned purple and orange, beautiful in a way that reminded him why he'd come to this planet in the first place. Somewhere behind him, the colony's leaders were probably arguing about what to do with him. Arrest him. Charge him. Throw the book at him. Or maybe, just maybe, let him try. He looked at the sleeping dragon in the back of his truck and made a decision. "I'm going to call you Kale," he said quietly. "And I'm going to show you something nobody else has bothered to teach you. I'm going to show you how to be better than what you are." Jack Riley had no idea how hard that promise would become. The first month nearly killed Jack Riley. And honestly, there were days when he wasn't entirely sure which one of them was closer to death. Him or Kale. Kale's first night in Jack's home, the dragon destroyed almost everything inside. The couch was torn to shreds. Pictures were knocked off walls. The kitchen table was flipped over like it weighed nothing. Jack woke up to the sound of his front door being smashed open, the dragon's natural fear and aggression taking control of his actions. The creature was panicking, still in pain from his injured wing, and his only response to pain was violence. Jack didn't get angry. He'd learned a long time ago that anger was just another form of surrender. Instead, he cleaned up the mess, fixed what he could, and waited for Kale to calm down. The second week was worse. Jack made the mistake of standing between Kale and fresh meat during feeding time. The dragon went into a frenzy, claws slashing and teeth snapping. One moment Jack moved too slowly, and suddenly a talon sliced through his arm, drawing blood. Another second later and that same talon could have torn open his stomach. Jack managed to dodge but just barely. His heart was pounding harder than it had in years. That's when he understood something important. You couldn't teach a starving, wounded creature through gentle kindness alone. You needed something else. You needed structure. You needed routine. You needed to show the animal that chaos led to nothing, while following the pattern led to safety and food and rest. Jack sat down that night and made a schedule. Not because he'd read it in some book about animal training. Not because an expert told him to do it. But because 20 years of military service had taught him that humans, and apparently dragons, needed routine to feel safe. Routine was like a cage made of predictability. And paradoxically, being inside that cage made you feel free. Every single morning at 5 a.m. before the sun came up, Jack took Kale to the northern field. They ran. They climbed. They practiced movements that made no sense to the dragon at first but gradually built strength and coordination. Jack never explained why. He just made sure it happened every single day, no variations, no excuses. At 8 a.m. sharp, feeding time. A specific amount of meat, prepared the same way, served in the same location. Kale learned quickly that the food came at exactly the right moment if he waited. He learned that attacking Jack or destroying things didn't bring the food faster. If anything, disruption meant delay. Frustration meant an empty stomach. Following the routine meant satisfaction. By noon, Jack set up obstacle courses on his property. Simple at first: jump over this log, crawl under that rope, navigate through these gates. As weeks passed, the courses became more complex. Jack added focus drills too, using hand signals and whistles to direct Kale's attention. The dragon had to learn to control his instincts and follow instruction, even when his natural impulses screamed at him to do something else. At 6 p.m. rest period. Non-negotiable. Kale had to lie down, stay still, and recover. Sleep was enforced. No exceptions. Jack's neighbor, a guy named Robert, thought he'd completely lost his mind. Robert owned a small farm next to Jack's property, and he watched this whole experiment with growing horror. One afternoon, Robert showed up at Jack's door with his arms crossed, his face tight with worry and judgment. "You're going to get yourself killed," Robert said flatly. "That thing will murder you in your sleep. It's not natural to try and make something like that obey. It goes against everything that creature is supposed to be. One day it's going to decide you're not worth the trouble, and that'll be the end of you." Jack didn't argue. He just nodded and said, "Maybe. But I'm going to try anyway." Month 2 was still rough. Kale tested boundaries constantly. He would refuse to obey commands. He would deliberately break the schedule. He seemed to be asking over and over again, "Are you serious about this? Or will you give up like everyone else?" Jack never gave up. By month 3 something shifted. Kale started showing up at the northern field before Jack even called him. The dragon anticipated feeding time and waited calmly instead of attacking. By month 6 the destructive behavior almost completely stopped. Kale understood the system. More than that, Kale seemed to prefer the system. Routine meant safety. Structure meant survival. A year in, people in the small nearby town started noticing. They'd see Jack walking through the streets with a massive dragon walking right beside him, moving in perfect sync, calm as anything. No chains. No restraints. Just understanding. By year 2 the whispers changed. People stopped saying Jack was crazy. Instead they talked about what he'd accomplished. The feral had learned discipline. The wild had learned control. The impossible had happened. Jack understood what others didn't. Chaos wasn't in Kale's nature. Fear was. And fear made you dangerous. But discipline? Discipline was love. Kale was 14 years old when he nearly succeeded in killing Jack Riley. The dragon had grown massive over those years. From a 6-foot injured juvenile to a 17-foot tower of muscle, scale, and raw power. His wings, once broken and useless, now stretched across 30 feet when fully extended. His jaw could crush stone. His claws could tear through metal. Everything about him screamed danger and dominance. And everything about him was also starting to question why he should listen to a human who was, by comparison, tiny and fragile. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon during a routine obstacle course drill. Jack had been running Kale through the same basic course for over a year. Nothing new, nothing challenging, just maintenance of skills they'd already built together. It should have been simple. Boring even. But something was different that day. Jack could feel it in the air, could see it in the way Kale moved. There was tension in the dragon's muscles that hadn't been there before. There was something new burning in those golden eyes. Maybe it was adolescence finally hitting him hard. Dragons matured slowly, and Kale was entering that dangerous phase where his body was flooded with new hormones and new urges. Maybe it was pure instinct, the natural rebellion that comes when a wild creature starts to realize how strong he actually is. Maybe Kale was just tired of following a schedule that he'd never chosen. Maybe he wanted to know what it felt like to be truly free, without routines and drills and a human telling him what to do every single hour of every single day. Whatever it was, Kale snapped. Jack was standing near the obstacle course, demonstrating a new hand signal, when the dragon's entire demeanor changed. 1 second, Kale was focused on the exercise. The next second, he turned toward Jack with his jaw open and his claws extended. There was no hesitation. No warning. No moment where Jack could have prepared himself. The dragon attacked with pure fury, with the kind of violence that only a cornered or rebellious creature can produce. Jack tried to move, his military instincts kicking in, his body remembering combat training from decades ago, but he was too slow. Way too slow. A talon, each one the size of a kitchen knife, sliced through Jack's right shoulder. Blood poured instantly. The pain was white-hot and immediate, so intense that his vision actually blurred for a moment. Jack went down hard, hitting the ground and rolling to protect his injured side. He could have fought back. He had the training. He could have reached for a weapon, tried to intimidate the dragon, attempted to establish dominance through force. Instead, he did something completely different. Jack stopped moving. He let himself fall. He lay there on the ground, bleeding, and he spoke. His voice was steady, not because he wasn't afraid but because fear was something you controlled, not something that controlled you. "You're strong, Kale," Jack said, breathing through the pain. "You're stronger than me. Probably always will be. But strength without discipline is just noise. Just chaos. It means nothing." Kale stood over him, chest heaving, muscles tense to strike again. The dragon's breathing was ragged. His eyes were wild with adrenaline and rebellion and the raw power of finally asserting himself against his caretaker. For a long moment, everything balanced on a knife's edge. Jack was completely vulnerable. Kale could finish this right now. But he didn't. Something in Jack's voice, something calm and unafraid, made the dragon pause. Made him hesitate. Made him actually listen. Jack continued talking, his words coming slower now because the blood loss was making him dizzy, but his tone never wavering. "I'm going to show you something, kid. And I want you to understand what it means." With his uninjured arm, Jack pulled off his shirt. The scar tissue was extensive. A long burn mark ran down his left side from an explosion that happened when Jack was 22 years old. There were 3 bullet scars, 1 in his upper chest, 2 in his abdomen. There were deep gashes from shrapnel. There were thin white lines from accidents during training. There were marks from fights with other soldiers, from friendly fire incidents, from mistakes and poor judgment and moments when Jack had let his strength and anger control him instead of the other way around. "Every single mark here," Jack said, his voice rough with pain but steady, "represents a time when I didn't have discipline. Every scar is from chaos. Every one of them is from a moment when I was strong but I wasn't controlled. And you know what? I destroyed things. I hurt people. I hurt myself. And for what? For nothing." Jack looked directly into Kale's golden eyes, even though moving his head sent new waves of pain through his shoulder. "That's what I'm trying to teach you," Jack continued. "Not because I want to control you. Not because I want to keep you trapped. But because strength without discipline destroys everything it touches. Including the person who has the strength." Kale's breathing slowed. The wild fire in his eyes started to fade, replaced by something different. Something deeper. Understanding maybe. Or recognition. Or the sudden realization that Jack had never been his jailer. Jack had been his guide. Slowly, carefully, Kale lowered his massive head. The dragon made a sound, not a roar, not a hiss, but something quieter. Something that almost sounded like acceptance. For the first time in 14 years, the dragon truly understood what Jack had been trying to teach him all along. The 3 years that followed the breaking point transformed Kale into something that nobody in the galaxy had ever seen before. After that day when Jack collapsed bleeding in the dirt, everything changed between them. Kale stopped testing boundaries. More than that, he started actively seeking out ways to improve himself. It was like something had finally clicked inside the dragon's mind. He understood now that Jack wasn't keeping him down. Jack was lifting him up. Jack adapted his training completely. The simple obstacle courses weren't enough anymore. Kale needed something more complex, something that would challenge his intelligence as much as his body. Jack started teaching him combat strategy, not how to kill more efficiently but how to think through problems. They'd run scenarios where Kale had to figure out the best way to navigate a situation using the minimum amount of force necessary. Jack would set up training grounds with multiple exits and obstacles. He'd tell Kale, "You need to get from point A to point B. But here's the thing, you have to get there without touching the white markers." Kale would have to think. He'd have to plan. He'd have to control his natural instincts and use his brain instead of just his power. Emotional regulation came next. Jack noticed that Kale would still have moments of frustration or anger, but now the dragon had the tools to handle those feelings. Jack taught him breathing techniques, actually taught a dragon how to breathe properly to calm himself down. He taught Kale how to recognize when emotions were building and how to take a step back before those emotions became actions. Every single movement that Kale learned had a purpose. Nothing was done just for the sake of doing it. Jack drilled into the dragon's mind that power without purpose was wasted energy. A claw strike that didn't serve a goal was just violence. A roar that didn't communicate something important was just noise. Everything had to mean something. Jack kept detailed records of everything. He documented the training methods, the progress, the setbacks, and the victories. He recorded videos of Kale's development. He wrote notes about what worked and what didn't. He was building something bigger than just training one dragon. He was creating a blueprint, a system that could potentially work for any creature. Word started spreading across the galaxy. Slowly at first, then faster and faster. A human had done the impossible. A human had taken a wild, feral dragon and turned it into something disciplined and purposeful. Scientists wanted to study the methods. Military organizations wanted to replicate the results. Corporations saw profit potential in an entire army of controlled dragons. The first representative arrived about 6 months into the 3-year period. She came from one of the big Earth-based corporations, carrying an offer that would have made Jack wealthy for the rest of his life. Millions of credits. They wanted Kale for breeding purposes. They wanted to create an entire species of disciplined dragons that they could sell to governments and private security firms. Jack refused. More came after that. A general from the Confederation military wanted Jack to come work for them, to train their soldiers using the same methods he'd used on Kale. The pay was astronomical. Jack said no. A private corporation offered to build him a facility, the largest dragon training center in the galaxy. State-of-the-art equipment, unlimited funding, a team of researchers at his disposal. Jack told them no as well. His neighbors thought he was insane. Robert, the farmer next door, actually pulled him aside one day and said, "Jack, you're turning down more money than most people see in a lifetime. What are you doing?" Jack looked at Kale in the distance, the dragon practicing footwork drills that Jack had taught him. "He's not for sale," Jack said simply. "And neither am I." When a reporter named Victoria from Earth News showed up to interview him, she asked him the same question that everyone was asking. She watched Kale execute a combat drill that was so precise, so calculated, that it looked like something a military strategist had choreographed. Each movement flowed into the next. Each action served a purpose. The dragon was moving like he'd been trained by the best military minds in the galaxy. "Why?" Victoria asked, her camera capturing everything. "Why did you never give up on him? Every single expert said it was impossible. Every authority figure told you to stop. You nearly died, multiple times. Why didn't you just let him go?" Jack took a long moment before answering. He looked at Kale, who had turned and was walking toward them with a calm, purposeful stride. The dragon was massive now, fully grown, with scales that shimmered like polished silver in the sunlight. But there was something else in his bearing, a dignity that hadn't existed before. A sense of control and purpose that radiated from him. "Because I recognized myself in those eyes," Jack said quietly. "When I first found him, Kale was broken. He was scared and in pain and lashing out because that was all he knew how to do. And I'd been there. Not exactly, I was never a dragon. But I was broken in my own way. I was a soldier who'd seen things I can't unsee. I was a person who'd made mistakes and carried scars from them." Jack paused as Kale approached and gently touched his head to Jack's uninjured shoulder, a gesture of affection that the young feral dragon from 14 years ago never would have been capable of. "Broken things sometimes just need the right person to believe in them," Jack continued. "They need someone who won't give up. Someone who understands that strength isn't about being wild and uncontrolled. Real strength is about discipline. Real strength is about choosing to be better than your worst impulses. Victoria asked more questions, but Jack had already said what mattered. Kale was proof. Proof that discipline transcends species. Proof that mentorship works. Proof that even the wildest creatures in the galaxy could become extraordinary when given structure, purpose, and someone who actually believed in them. The crisis came without any warning at all. Jack was 2 miles away from the colony when the alarms started blaring. He'd gone into town that morning to pick up supplies. Some metal reinforcement for the training facility, medical supplies, and food. He was just loading the last of the packages into his truck when his communication device started screaming at him. Colony under attack. The voice belonged to Patricia Webb, the colony administrator. We're being invaded. This is not a drill. Jack's hands froze. He could hear the panic in her voice. He could hear shouting in the background. He could hear the unmistakable sound of weapons fire. How bad? Jack asked, already moving toward his truck. A mercenary group. They came in hard and fast. They're trying to break into the research center. They want genetic material, something about breeding weapons. Jack, they're specifically looking for Kale. They said they know about the trained dragon and they want him for... Jack stopped listening after that. He knew what he needed to do. He pushed the truck to its limit, racing back toward his property. His mind was spinning through possibilities. Kale was alone. The dragon wasn't a weapon, but these people didn't care about that distinction. They saw potential. They saw profit. They saw a tool to be used. 20 minutes later, Jack arrived home to find Kale already in motion. The dragon had heard the colony's emergency broadcast too. Kale was moving toward the research center, his massive frame moving with purpose and speed. Kale? Wait. Jack called out, but the dragon was already gone. Jack jumped back in his truck and headed toward the colony's main research building. When he arrived, what he found made his heart stop. There were 5 armed mercenaries spread out across the front entrance of the research center. They had heavy weapons, the kind designed to bring down buildings. Behind them, through the glass doors, Jack could see about 30 scientists and support staff huddled inside, trapped and terrified. And standing between the mercenaries and the building was Kale. The dragon didn't roar. He didn't rage. He didn't do any of the things that a wild, untrained dragon would do. Instead, Kale stood perfectly still, his massive frame blocking the doorway completely. His wings were partially extended, not threateningly, but in a way that made him appear even larger. His eyes were locked on the mercenaries with absolute focus and intelligence. "Move the dragon," one of the mercenaries shouted. He raised his weapon and fired. The bullet hit Kale's scaled chest. It bounced off harmlessly. The dragon didn't flinch. He didn't move. He simply stared at the shooter with an expression that communicated one thing very clearly: I will not move. Then Kale did something remarkable. He moved forward, slowly and deliberately, using his body to force the mercenaries backward. There was no blind charging. No frenzied attack. Every step was calculated. Every movement served a purpose. Kale was using his sheer size and presence to push the group away from the building without actually attacking them. He was using psychology, the overwhelming pressure of facing something massive and intelligent and absolutely determined. One mercenary tried to flank around Kale's left side. The dragon's tail whipped around, not to strike but to block the path. Another tried to run past on the right. Kale's wing extended, forcing him back. The dragon was herding them like a skilled sheepdog herds sheep, moving them farther and farther from the research center. Jack watched from his truck as Kale continued the tactic. The mercenaries were becoming increasingly panicked. Their weapons seemed useless. Their tactical training meant nothing against an opponent who was thinking several moves ahead. They were dealing with something they'd never encountered before, a dragon who was intelligent enough to subdue them without causing lethal harm. Within 5 minutes, the entire mercenary group had retreated. They got into their spacecraft and lifted off, leaving a trail of dust and smoke behind them. The threat was over. Jack got out of his truck slowly, still processing what he'd just witnessed. Kale turned toward him, and for a moment the two of them just looked at each other. No words needed to be spoken. Jack understood that Kale had proven something fundamental. Discipline wasn't oppression. Discipline was liberation. It was the power to choose your actions instead of being controlled by your impulses. The dragon had just saved 30 lives without seriously hurting anyone. 10 years later, things had changed dramatically. Jack had opened a sanctuary on a large piece of land outside the colony. It was called the Riley Institute for Untamable Creatures, though Jack always hated that name. He insisted they weren't untamable. They were just misunderstood, undisciplined, and waiting for someone who believed in them enough to teach them better. The sanctuary had grown substantially. There were other dragons now, 5 of them in various stages of training. There were other creatures too, alien beings that had been labeled dangerous and worthless by every government and corporation in the galaxy. Some could barely communicate. Some had severe behavioral problems. Some were scarred from trauma and abuse. But Kale was there with all of them, now massive and silver-scaled, his body a walking testament to what discipline and purpose could create. The older dragon worked with Jack to train the younger ones. And the young creatures responded to Kale in ways they wouldn't respond to Jack alone. They saw in Kale another creature like themselves who had been broken and angry and wild, and who had learned to be something different. Jack watched one afternoon as Kale worked with a young dragon who reminded him painfully of the juvenile he'd found in the ruins all those years ago. The young creature was aggressive and frightened and lashing out. Kale was patient with it, showing through action and example what discipline looked like. The young dragon was beginning to understand. Beginning to trust. Jack remembered that terrified creature with the broken wing. He remembered the moment when Kale had nearly killed him. He remembered every struggle, every setback, every victory along the way. And he understood something profound. The greatest gift one broken soul could give another wasn't rescue. Rescue was temporary. Rescue was just the beginning. The greatest gift was discipline, purpose, hope. Showing someone, or something, that they could be more than their worst moments. That strength without control was just destruction. That real power came from choosing to be better. Kale looked at Jack across the training field and made a low, rumbling sound, the closest thing a dragon could make to a laugh. The young dragon looked between Kale and Jack, beginning to understand that this wasn't oppression. This was freedom. This was love. This was legacy. The end.